Madison Fletcher had always been invisible at Riverside High School in Cedar Falls, Iowa. She preferred the shadows, the quiet corners of the library, and the safety of blending into the background. But invisibility, she would soon learn, was just another word for vulnerability. What started as harmless teasing would escalate into something far more sinister. And when Madison finally decided to fight back, the entire school would witness just how sharp a quiet girl's claws could be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first day of senior year at Riverside High brought with it the familiar anxiety that Madison Fletcher had grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. She clutched her worn leather messenger bag closer to her chest as she navigated the crowded hallways, her dark brown hair falling like a curtain around her face. Madison had perfected the art of being unremarkable average height, simple clothes from discount stores, and a voice so soft that teachers often had to ask her to repeat herself. Cedar Falls was the kind of small Iowa town where everyone knew everyone, and yet Madison felt like a ghost floating through its streets. Her mother, Janet Fletcher, worked double shifts at the local diner to keep their small apartment above the hardware store, leaving Madison to fend for herself most evenings. Her father had left when she was 12, taking with him not just his presence, but also any confidence Madison might have had in her own worth. The social hierarchy at Riverside High was as rigid as the corn rows that stretched endlessly beyond the town limits. At the top sat the untouchables, the athletes, the cheerleaders, the kids whose parents owned the successful businesses in town. And at the very pinnacle of this pyramid stood 3 individuals who would soon make Madison's life a living hell. Bryce Cunningham was the golden boy of Cedar Falls, the quarterback whose arm had led the Riverside Ravens to 2 consecutive state championships. With his perfectly styled blonde hair and Letterman jacket that he wore like armor, Bryce commanded respect and fear in equal measure. His father owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties, and everyone knew that Bryce's future was already mapped out: college scholarship, professional football, and a life of privilege that seemed as natural as breathing. Ashley Morrison was everything Madison wasn't confident, beautiful, and cruel in the way that only teenage girls could be. Her platinum blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her designer clothes spoke of a family that had never known financial struggle. Ashley's father was the mayor of Cedar Falls, and she wielded her family's political influence like a weapon. She had been dating Bryce since sophomore year, and together they formed the kind of power couple that made everyone else feel insignificant. The third member of this toxic triumvirate was Derek Hoffman, Bryce's best friend, and Ashley's loyal lieutenant. Derek was shorter than Bryce, but made up for it with a vicious streak that ran as deep as the Missouri River. His dark hair was always slicked back, and his eyes held a cold intelligence that Madison had learned to fear. Derek's family owned the local newspaper, and he had inherited his father's talent for finding people's secrets and using them as leverage. Madison's troubles began on a Tuesday morning in late September. She was sitting alone in the cafeteria, reading a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird while picking at her peanut butter sandwich, when she felt a shadow fall across her table. She looked up to find the 3 of them standing there, their faces wearing expressions of mock concern. "Hey there, Madison," Ashley said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We couldn't help but notice you sitting here all alone, again." Madison's heart began to race, but she kept her eyes fixed on her book. "I'm fine," she whispered, hoping they would lose interest and move on. "Fine," Derek laughed, sliding into the seat across from her without invitation. "Sitting alone every day, barely speaking to anyone, wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation. That doesn't sound fine to me." Bryce remained standing, his massive frame casting Madison in shadow. "We're just trying to be friendly," he said. though his tone suggested anything but friendship. Maybe you should try talking to people, like normal people do. I don't bother anyone, Madison managed to say, her voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. No, you don't, Ashley agreed, sitting down beside Derek. You're like a little mouse, scurrying around, trying not to be noticed. But we notice you, Madison. We see how you duck your head when people try to talk to you, how you practically run away when someone gets too close. Madison felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She gathered her things, preparing to leave, but Derek's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Where are you going? He asked, his grip tighter than necessary. We're just getting to know each other. Please, Madison whispered, trying to pull away. I just want to eat my lunch. Oh, come on, Ashley said, leaning forward with a predatory smile. Don't be so shy. We heard you talking to Mrs. Patterson in English class yesterday. You've got a voice in there somewhere. The three of them had indeed heard Madison speaking in English class, where she felt most comfortable. Literature was her escape, her sanctuary, and when discussing the themes of Harper Lee's masterpiece, she had briefly forgotten her usual reticence. She had spoken passionately about the injustice faced by Tom Robinson, her voice growing stronger, as she articulated her thoughts about prejudice and social hierarchy. You know what? Bryce said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. I think our little mouse here needs to learn how to speak up. Maybe we can help with that. Over the next few days, their attention escalated from casual mockery to something more systematic. They would accidentally bump into Madison in the hallways, causing her to drop her books. They would sit near her in the library, whispering loud enough for her to hear comments about her appearance, her clothes, and her family's financial situation. Derek, with his newspaper connections, had somehow discovered that Madison's mother worked at the diner and that they lived in the cramped apartment above Murphy's Hardware. I heard your mom serves the best coffee in town, Ashley said one day, cornering Madison at her locker. Of course, she's been practicing long enough. What is it now? 15 years of slinging hash. Madison's hands trembled as she fumbled with her combination lock. She works hard, she said quietly. Oh, I'm sure she does, Ashley replied, her voice full of mock sympathy. It must be exhausting, being on your feet all day, dealing with cranky customers. No wonder you're so quiet. Must be genetic. The worst part wasn't the cruelty, it was the audience. Other students would stop to watch these encounters, some looking uncomfortable, but none brave enough to intervene. Madison understood their reluctance. Challenging Bryce, Ashley, and Derek was social suicide in a school where popularity was currency, and they controlled the exchange rate. As October arrived with its crisp autumn air and changing leaves, Madison found herself dreading each school day more than the last. She began taking longer routes to her classes, avoiding the main hallways where she was most likely to encounter them. She ate lunch in the library, hunched over her books, trying to make herself as small as possible, but her tormentors were nothing if not persistent. They began showing up wherever she tried to hide: the library, the computer lab, even the nurse's office where she sometimes went to escape during lunch. It was Derek who first suggested they needed to train her to be more social. You know what your problem is, Madison? He said one day, blocking her path to the library. You're too much like a scared little animal. Always running away, never standing up for yourself. Maybe she needs to learn how to communicate better, Ashley added, appearing at Madison's other side. Like animals do. Bryce joined them, completing the triangle that trapped Madison in the hallway. That's not a bad idea, he said, his voice thoughtful. Animals make sounds to communicate. Maybe if Madison practiced making animal sounds, she'd get more comfortable using her voice. Madison felt her stomach drop. What do you mean? She asked, though she was afraid she already knew. Well, Ashley said, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "You remind me of a cat. You know, the way you slink around, trying not to be noticed. Maybe you should practice meowing, just to get comfortable making sounds." "That's ridiculous," Madison said, finding a spark of courage. "I'm not going to—" "Oh, but you are," Derek interrupted, his voice hard. "See, here's the thing, Madison. You have a choice. You can meow like a good little kitten, or we can make your life here much, much worse. And trust me, we have ways of making things worse." Madison looked around desperately, but the hallway was empty. Most students were in class, and the few who passed by quickly averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. "This is insane," Madison whispered. "You can't make me." "Can't we?" Ashley asked, pulling out her phone. "You know, Derek's dad runs the newspaper. One story about the weird girl who lives above the hardware store, whose mom can barely keep a job, and everyone in town will know your business. Is that what you want?" Madison felt the walls closing in around her. In a town like Cedar Falls, reputation was everything, and her mother's job at the diner was one of the few steady sources of income they had. If rumors started spreading about their family, it could destroy what little stability they had managed to build. "Plus," Bryce added, "I know the coach is always looking for reasons to cut people from teams. Your friend Tommy Martinez on the cross-country team might find himself benched if word gets around that he's been hanging out with the wrong crowd." Madison's heart sank. Tommy Martinez was one of the few people who had ever shown her kindness, occasionally sitting with her at lunch or helping her carry books when she was struggling. He was also one of the poorest kids in school, and his spot on the cross-country team was his only hope for a college scholarship. "What do you want from me?" Madison asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's simple," Derek said, his smile cold and calculating. "Tomorrow, at lunch, you're going to sit with us. And when we ask you to meow like a cat, you're going to do it, nice and loud so everyone can hear. And if I don't?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Then we start making calls," Ashley said, waving her phone. "First to my dad about your mother's work situation, then to Coach Stevens about Tommy's attitude problems. Choices have consequences, Madison. Choose wisely." That night, Madison lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of her mother moving around in the kitchen below. Janet Fletcher was preparing for another early morning shift at the diner, and Madison could hear the familiar sounds of her routine, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the soft shuffle of her mother's feet on the worn linoleum floor. Madison had always been protective of her mother, who had sacrificed so much to keep them afloat after her father left. Janet worked long hours for minimal pay, dealing with demanding customers and a boss who seemed to take pleasure in reminding her how easily she could be replaced. The last thing Madison wanted was to cause her mother any additional stress or jeopardize her job. But the thought of submitting to Bryce, Ashley, and Derek's demands made her physically ill. She had read enough about bullying to know that giving in would only make things worse. They would escalate their demands, finding new ways to humiliate her, and she would be trapped in an endless cycle of degradation, as she lay there in the darkness. Madison thought about the protagonists in her favorite book, Scout Finch, Jane Eyre, Hermione Granger. They had all faced seemingly impossible situations, standing up to forces much more powerful than themselves. But they were fictional characters, and their authors had provided them with the courage and resources they needed to triumph. Madison felt utterly alone, with no magical abilities or wise mentors to guide her through this nightmare. The next morning arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Madison dressed mechanically, choosing a simple sweater and jeans that she hoped would draw minimal attention. She braided her hair back tightly, as if the severe style could somehow provide her with the strength she needed to face what was coming. The school day passed in a blur of anxiety and dread. Madison couldn't concentrate on her classes, her mind constantly returning to the ultimatum she had been given. She noticed other students looking at her strangely, and she wondered if word had somehow gotten out about what was planned for lunch. When the lunch bell rang, Madison felt her knees go weak. She stood outside the cafeteria doors for several minutes, watching through the glass as students filed in, found their seats, and began their daily rituals of eating and socializing. She spotted Bryce, Ashley, and Derek at their usual table in the center of the room, the prime location that proclaimed their status to everyone who entered. Derek looked up and caught her eye through the glass, tapping his watch with an expression that made his message clear. "Time's up." Madison pushed through the doors and walked toward their table on unsteady legs. The cafeteria noise seemed to fade around her, replaced by the thundering of her own heartbeat. She was dimly aware of other students noticing her unusual behavior. Madison Fletcher never sat with the popular kids, never drew attention to herself. "Well, look who decided to join us," Ashley said loudly as Madison approached their table. "Come on, sit down. We saved you a spot." Madison sat in the empty chair they had left for her, directly across from Derek. The plastic seat felt cold against her back, and she clutched her lunch bag in her lap like a shield. "Aren't you going to eat?" Bryce asked, his voice carrying easily across the nearby tables. "You look a little pale, Madison. Everything okay?" Madison could feel the eyes of other students on her, drawn by the unusual sight of the school's most popular students paying attention to its most invisible member. She managed a small nod, not trusting her voice. "You know," Ashley said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "we were just talking about how quiet you always are. We think you might have some kind of social anxiety." "Yeah," Derek added, his voice full of false concern. "We want to help you overcome it. Sometimes people need to practice making sounds before they can really start communicating." Madison felt her face burning with humiliation. She could see other students at nearby tables turning to listen, their conversations dying away as they sensed something interesting was about to happen. "What do you think, Madison?" Bryce asked, his voice loud enough to carry across half the cafeteria. "Ready to practice your communication skills?" Madison's mouth felt dry as cotton. She looked around desperately, hoping to see a teacher or administrator, anyone who might intervene. But the lunch monitors were clustered at the far end of the room, and the few teachers present were engaged in their own conversations. "I don't know what you mean," Madison whispered, though she knew exactly what they were asking. "Oh, come on," Ashley said, her voice dripping with fake encouragement. "We talked about this yesterday. You're going to practice making animal sounds. It's a proven therapeutic technique." "Start with a cat," Derek suggested, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "Cats are nice and simple, just a little meow." Madison felt tears threatening to spill over. The cafeteria had grown significantly quieter, and she could sense the attention of dozens of students focused on their table. This was exactly what Bryce, Ashley, and Derek had planned: maximum humiliation in the most public setting possible. "I can't," Madison said, her voice so quiet that Ashley had to lean forward to hear her. "Can't or won't?" Derek asked, his tone sharpening. "Because we talked about the consequences of not participating in our little social exercise." Madison thought of her mother, already at work at the diner, completely unaware of the nightmare her daughter was facing. She thought of Tommy Martinez, who had been kind to her when no one else bothered to notice she existed. She thought of the fragile stability of her life, built on such precarious foundations that one cruel rumor could bring it all crashing down. "Just once," Bryce said, his voice now carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet cafeteria. "One little meow, and we'll leave you alone for the rest of the day." Madison knew it was a lie. She had read enough about bullying to understand that giving in would only lead to more demands, more humiliation, more degradation. But with dozens of eyes watching her and no way to escape, she felt trapped in a nightmare with no good options. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched out, tension building like electricity in the air before a storm. She could hear the whispers starting, students at nearby tables beginning to speculate about what was happening. "Any day now," Ashley said, her voice sharp with impatience. "We don't have all day." Madison closed her eyes, trying to block out the faces surrounding her. In her mind, she could hear her mother's voice from years ago, telling her to stand up for herself, to never let anyone make her feel small. But that advice seemed impossible to follow when the consequences of resistance could destroy everything she cared about. The cafeteria had fallen almost completely silent now, the usual chaos of lunchtime replaced by the hushed anticipation of an audience waiting for a show. Madison opened her eyes and looked around at the faces watching her, some curious, some uncomfortable, but none offering help or support. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her like a physical force, and she felt herself beginning to break under the pressure. "Meow," she whispered, so quietly that only the 3 tormentors at her table could hear. "Louder," Derek commanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We can barely hear you." Madison's face burned with shame as she realized this was only the beginning. They weren't going to be satisfied with a quiet, dignified submission. They wanted a spectacle, a complete humiliation that would mark her as their victim for the rest of her high school career. "Meow," she said again, her voice slightly stronger but still trembling with embarrassment. "Much better," Ashley said, clapping her hands together. "But I think you can do better than that. Really get into character." Madison looked around the cafeteria one more time, seeing the faces of her classmates watching her with a mixture of fascination and pity. She realized that after today, she would never be able to fade into the background again. She would be known as the girl who meowed like a cat in the cafeteria, the girl who was so pathetic that the popular kids could make her do anything. But what Madison didn't realize, as she sat there in the spotlight of her own humiliation, was that this moment would mark the beginning of something else entirely. The quiet girl who had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility was about to discover that sometimes the most devastating attacks come not from the predators who hunt in the daylight, but from the prey who learns to hunt in the shadows. The meowing was just the beginning. The sound echoed through the cafeteria like a gunshot. Madison's third meow had been loud enough for half the room to hear, and the reaction was immediate. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd of students. Phones appeared as if by magic, and the whispers began in earnest. "Oh my God, is she actually meowing? Someone's recording this." Madison felt her world crumbling around her as she watched Ashley's triumphant smile and Derek's satisfied nod. Bryce leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking like a king surveying his conquered territory. But their victory celebration was interrupted by an unexpected voice. "What the hell is going on here?" Everyone turned to see Samantha Rivera standing behind Madison's chair, her dark eyes blazing with fury. Samantha was a senior like Madison, but that's where the similarities ended. While Madison had spent years trying to disappear, Samantha had built a reputation as someone you didn't mess with. The daughter of Mexican immigrants who had fought tooth and nail to establish their construction business in Cedar Falls, Samantha had inherited her parents' fierce determination and zero tolerance for injustice. "Nothing that concerns you, Rivera," Derek said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why don't you mind your own business?" Samantha stepped closer to the table, her presence commanding attention. "When I see 3 jackasses humiliating someone half their size, it becomes my business." "Careful," Ashley warned, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You're walking on thin ice here, am I?" Samantha shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you 3 are the ones who should be worried about ice. Specifically, the kind you'll be skating on when people find out what kind of sick games you play." Madison looked up at Samantha with a mixture of gratitude and terror. She appreciated the intervention, but she knew it would only make things worse in the long run. Bryce, Ashley, and Derek didn't forget slights, and they had the power to make life miserable for anyone who crossed them. "This doesn't involve you," Bryce said, standing up to his full height. At 6'3", he towered over Samantha, but she didn't back down. "It involves me now," Samantha replied coolly. "Madison, come on, let's get out of here." Madison wanted nothing more than to flee, but Derek's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist again. "She's not going anywhere. We're not done with our conversation." "Let go of her," Samantha said, her voice low and dangerous. "Or what?" Derek challenged. "You'll report us to the principal?" "Good luck with that. My dad plays golf with Principal Henderson every weekend." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "You know what your problem is, Hoffman? You think having connections makes you untouchable, but connections work both ways." Before Derek could respond, Samantha had pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of him gripping Madison's wrist. The flash caught the attention of everyone in the immediate area, and several other students began taking pictures as well. "Social media is forever," Samantha said with a cold smile. "Wonder how this will look with the right caption." Derek immediately released Madison's wrist, his face flushing with anger. "You little, choose your next words very carefully," Samantha warned. "Because unlike Madison, I've got nothing to lose by fighting back." The tension in the cafeteria was palpable. Other students had stopped eating entirely, sensing that something significant was happening. Madison felt caught between relief and terror, grateful for Samantha's intervention, but knowing that this confrontation would have consequences. Ashley, who had been watching the exchange with calculating eyes, suddenly stood up. "You know what, Samantha? You're right. We were just having a friendly conversation with Madison about overcoming her shyness. Maybe we got a little carried away." Her tone was conciliatory, but Madison could see the fury burning behind her perfectly applied makeup. Ashley was strategic above all else, and she knew when to retreat and regroup. "Come on, guys," Ashley said to Bryce and Derek. "Let's give Madison some space to think about what we discussed." As the three of them gathered their things and prepared to leave, Derek leaned down close to Madison's ear. "This isn't over," he whispered, his voice so low that only she could hear. "Not by a long shot." After they left, Samantha sat down in the chair Derek had vacated. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentler now. Madison nodded, though she was far from okay. Her hands were still shaking, and she could feel the stares of dozens of students burning into her back. "Thank you," she whispered. "But you shouldn't have." "Yes, I should have," Samantha interrupted. "Someone needed to. The question is, what are you going to do about this?" Madison looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is just the beginning. You think they're going to leave you alone now? They're going to make your life hell, and it's only going to get worse." Madison felt her stomach drop. She had known this, of course, but hearing it said out loud made it feel more real. "I don't have a choice," she said quietly. "If I fight back, they'll destroy my mom's job, get my friend kicked off the team. They'll do that anyway," Samantha said bluntly. "Bullies don't keep their word. They'll take what they want from you and then find new ways to hurt you." The rest of the lunch period passed in a blur. Madison barely spoke, picking at her sandwich while Samantha outlined the harsh realities of her situation. By the time the bell rang, Madison felt more hopeless than ever. The afternoon brought fresh humiliations. Word of the cafeteria incident had spread through the school like wildfire, and Madison found herself the subject of whispered conversations and barely concealed stares. Students she had never spoken to before now knew her as the girl who meowed, and she could see the mixture of pity and amusement in their eyes. In her last class of the day, biology with Mr. Thompson, Madison tried to focus on the lesson about cellular respiration. But her concentration was shattered when Ashley walked in late, claiming she had been helping in the principal's office. Ashley took the seat directly behind Madison, and for the next 45 minutes, she provided a constant stream of whispered commentary. Did you know that cats spend 70% of their lives sleeping? Ashley whispered during a particularly quiet moment in the lesson. Maybe that's why you're always so tired looking. Madison tried to ignore her, but Ashley's voice was perfectly calibrated to be audible to the surrounding students while remaining below Mr. Thompson's notice. I read that cats can make over 100 different sounds, Ashley continued. You're clearly just getting started. I bet with practice you could expand your repertoire. By the time class ended, Madison's face was burning with embarrassment. She gathered her things quickly and tried to escape, but Ashley caught up with her in the hallway. Madison, wait, Ashley called out, her voice loud enough to attract attention. I wanted to apologize earlier. I think there might have been a misunderstanding. Madison stopped, hope flickering in her chest. Maybe Ashley was genuinely sorry. Maybe this nightmare could end before it got worse. You see, Ashley continued, moving closer, I don't think you understood the assignment. When we asked you to meow, we weren't trying to humiliate you. We were trying to help you break out of your shell. Madison stared at her, confused. Assignment? Oh. Yes, Ashley said, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. We've decided to help you overcome your social anxiety through a series of therapeutic exercises. Tomorrow, we're going to work on your bark. Madison felt the blood drain from her face. My what? Your bark, Ashley repeated cheerfully. Dogs are much more social than cats, after all. If you can learn to bark like a dog, you'll be well on your way to normal human conversation. I'm not going to, oh, but you are, Ashley interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper. Because if you don't, I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with Coach Stevens about Tommy Martinez's academic eligibility. Did you know that athletes need to maintain a C average to stay on the team? And did you know that I happen to know Tommy's been struggling in chemistry? Madison's heart sank. Tommy had mentioned his difficulties with chemistry, and Madison had been helping him with homework after school. If Ashley could somehow sabotage his grade or convince the coach that he was academically ineligible, it would destroy his chances of getting a scholarship. You can't do that, Madison said desperately. It's not fair. Fair? Ashley laughed. Honey, life isn't fair. But it can be a lot more unfair if you don't play along with our little game. That evening, Madison walked home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, her mind reeling from the events of the day. The town that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed full of shadows and threats. She passed the diner where her mother worked, seeing the warm glow of the windows and the familiar sight of her mother refilling coffee cups for the evening customers. Janet Fletcher looked up and waved. As Madison passed, her face lighting up with a smile that made Madison's heart ache. Her mother had sacrificed so much to give Madison a stable life, working long hours at a thankless job to keep them afloat. The last thing Madison wanted was to be the cause of her mother losing that job. When Madison reached their small apartment, she climbed the narrow stairs and let herself in with her key. The apartment was tiny but clean, furnished with second-hand furniture that her mother had painstakingly restored. Madison dropped her backpack by the door and collapsed onto the worn couch, finally allowing herself to cry. She cried for the humiliation she had endured, for the fear that gripped her every time she thought about facing another day at school, and for the impossible position she found herself in. But most of all, she cried for the loss of her anonymity, the protective invisibility that had kept her safe for so long. As she sat there in the gathering darkness, Madison's mind began to wander to the books that had always been her refuge. She thought about the characters who had faced seemingly impossible odds and found ways to triumph. But those were stories, she reminded herself. In real life, the underdogs didn't always win. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Madison's heart stopped when she saw the sender, Derek Hoffman. The message was brief but chilling. "Hope you're practicing your bark. Tomorrow's going to be even more fun." Madison deleted the message immediately, but the damage was done. She realized that this was just the beginning of a campaign of terror that would only escalate. They had tasted blood in the water, and now they would circle like sharks, looking for new ways to humiliate and degrade her. She thought about Samantha's words from lunch. "What are you going to do about this?" The question echoed in her mind as she sat in the darkness of her apartment. What could she do? She was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely vulnerable. But as Madison sat there, something began to shift in her mind. She thought about the look of triumph on Ashley's face, the satisfied smirk on Derek's lips, the casual cruelty with which they had destroyed her dignity. She thought about all the other students who had watched the spectacle, some with pity, others with amusement, but none with the courage to intervene. For the first time in her life, Madison Fletcher began to feel something she had never experienced before: rage. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns bright and fades quickly, but the cold, calculating fury that builds slowly and burns forever. She had always been quiet, always been careful, always been invisible. But invisibility, she was beginning to realize, could be a weapon as well as a shield. People who didn't see you couldn't guard against you. People who dismissed you as harmless wouldn't expect you to fight back. Madison walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a worn notebook she had been using for creative writing. She opened it to a fresh page and began to write, not a story this time, but a list. She wrote down everything she knew about Bryce, Ashley, and Derek, their routines, their weaknesses, their secrets, their fears. Bryce, for all his athletic prowess and popularity, was terrified of losing his scholarship. His grades were marginal at best, and he relied heavily on the special treatment he received from teachers who were fans of the football team. He also had a reputation to maintain, and any scandal that threatened his image as the golden boy of Cedar Falls would be devastating. Ashley's power came from her family's political connections and her carefully cultivated image as the perfect daughter. But Madison had noticed things others missed: the way Ashley's smile never quite reached her eyes, the occasional slip in her perfect facade, the hints of insecurity beneath the confident exterior. Derek was perhaps the most dangerous of the three, but he was also the most vulnerable. His family's newspaper was struggling financially, and his father's reputation in the community was built on a foundation of carefully maintained secrets. Derek himself was known for his intelligence, but Madison had observed that his cruelty often stemmed from his own insecurities about his social standing. As Madison wrote, she began to feel something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the naive hope that her problems would somehow resolve themselves, but the determined hope that comes from having a plan. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible, learning to observe without being observed, to listen without being heard. She knew things about her classmates that they didn't even know about themselves. She had access to information that the popular kids took for granted, and she had the motivation to use it. The quiet girl who had meowed like a cat in the cafeteria was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who had learned that the most dangerous predators were often the ones you never saw coming. Madison closed the notebook and looked out her window at the sleeping town of Cedar Falls. Tomorrow she would return to school and face whatever new humiliations Bryce, Ashley, and Derek had planned for her. But she would also begin the careful work of gathering information, building alliances, and preparing for a war that her enemies didn't even know was coming. They had awakened something in Madison Fletcher that had been sleeping for far too long. They had pushed the quiet girl too far, and now they were about to discover that even the most docile animals could grow claws when cornered. The game was just beginning, and Madison was about to show them that she knew how to play. Madison arrived at school the next morning with a plan. She had spent hours the night before researching everything she could find about psychological warfare, social dynamics, and the art of information gathering. Her notebook now contained detailed profiles of her 3 tormentors, complete with schedules, habits, and potential vulnerabilities. But first, she had to survive whatever Ashley had planned for her. The morning passed without incident, which only heightened Madison's anxiety. She knew they were planning something, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. During her 3rd period chemistry class, she noticed Derek whispering to Tommy Martinez near the lab stations. Tommy's face went pale, and he kept glancing nervously in Madison's direction. After class, Tommy caught up with Madison in the hallway. "Hey, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight with worry. Madison's heart sank. "What did he tell you?" "That jerk Hoffman said some stuff about you getting me in trouble," Tommy said, running his hand through his dark hair. "Something about my grades and the team. Madison, what's going on?" Madison felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on her shoulders. Tommy was one of the few genuine people in her life, someone who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. Now he was being dragged into her nightmare. "It's complicated," Madison said quietly. "Just be careful around them." "Okay. And if Coach Stevens asks you anything weird about your academics, let me know immediately." Tommy's brown eyes filled with concern. "Are they giving you trouble?" "Because if they are—" "No," Madison interrupted quickly. "I can handle it. Just focus on your running and your grades. Please." As Tommy walked away, Madison felt her resolve hardening. These people weren't just attacking her anymore. They were threatening innocent people who had done nothing wrong. It was time to stop being reactive and start being proactive. During lunch, Madison made her first strategic move. Instead of hiding in the library, as she usually did, she positioned herself at a table near the kitchen entrance where she could observe the cafeteria while appearing to read. She watched as Bryce, Ashley, and Derek held court at their usual table, noting who approached them, who they spoke to, and how they interacted with different social groups. She also noticed something interesting. Ashley kept checking her phone and seemed agitated about something. When Samantha Rivera walked past their table, Ashley's expression darkened considerably. Madison filed this information away for later use. 20 minutes into the lunch period, Ashley stood up and began walking in Madison's direction. Madison's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to appear calm and focused on her book. "There you are," Ashley said, sliding into the seat across from Madison. "I was wondering when you'd show your face." "I'm just eating lunch," Madison replied quietly. "Of course you are," Ashley said with a cold smile. "But lunch period is almost over, and we haven't had our little training session yet." Madison looked around the cafeteria. It was less crowded than yesterday, but there were still plenty of witnesses. She could see several students already turning their attention toward their table, phones at the ready. "I'm not doing this again," Madison said, her voice steadier than she felt. Ashley's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Oh, but you are. We discussed this yesterday. Today's lesson is about canine communication. Much more sophisticated than feline sounds." "No," Madison said, meeting Ashley's eyes for the first time. "I won't." For a moment, Ashley looked genuinely surprised. Then her expression hardened into something ugly and dangerous. "You seem to be confused about how this works," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me clarify things for you." Ashley pulled out her phone and showed Madison the screen. It was a text conversation with someone named Dad, apparently. Mayor Morrison himself. "All I have to do is send one message," Ashley said, "and your mother's work situation becomes very complicated. Health inspectors can be very thorough when they want to be. Labor violations can be found anywhere if you look hard enough." Madison felt her stomach clench, but something had changed in her since yesterday. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by something else: cold, calculating anger. You know what's interesting about threats? Madison said quietly. They only work if people believe you'll follow through. Ashley's smile faltered slightly. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Madison continued, her voice barely above a whisper, that threatening someone's livelihood is a serious crime, especially when your father is a public official. I wonder how the county prosecutor would view text messages about using municipal resources to harass private citizens. Ashley's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Madison asked. You know, I've been reading a lot about political corruption lately. Fascinating subject. Did you know that abuse of power charges can destroy entire political careers? The confidence drained from Ashley's expression. She had expected the same frightened, compliant girl from yesterday, not this calm, collected person who seemed to know exactly which buttons to push. Besides, Madison added, I've been thinking about your other threat, about Tommy Martinez. You said you could get him kicked off the team for academic problems. But here's the thing. I've been helping Tommy with his chemistry homework for weeks. His grades have actually improved significantly. Mr. Patterson keeps detailed records, and Tommy's been getting A's and B's on recent assignments. Ashley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Madison could see the panic starting to set in as Ashley realized her threats were built on foundations of sand. But most importantly, Madison continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, I've been thinking about yesterday. About how you recorded me being humiliated. About how you shared that recording with other people. I didn't, Ashley started to protest. Please, Madison interrupted. Half the school saw it by the end of the day. The thing is, recording someone without their consent and distributing it can be considered harassment. In some cases, it can even be classified as cyberbullying, which carries criminal penalties. Ashley was now genuinely frightened. Madison could see it in her eyes, in the way her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her phone. What do you want? Ashley asked, her voice no longer carrying its usual confidence. Madison leaned forward slightly. I want you to leave me alone. I want you to leave Tommy alone. And I want you to understand that the quiet girl you thought you could push around doesn't exist anymore. Ashley stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Madison. Agreed, it isn't. As Ashley walked away, Madison felt a surge of something she had never experienced before, power. She had faced down her primary tormentor and won. But she knew this was just the beginning. Ashley would regroup, probably bring Bryce and Derek into the planning, and come back with something worse. That afternoon, Madison put the second phase of her plan into action. She had noticed that Derek often stayed after school to work on the student newspaper in the computer lab. The lab was usually empty, except for Derek and maybe one or two other students, making it the perfect place for a private conversation. Madison waited until Derek was alone, then quietly entered the lab. He was hunched over one of the computers, typing furiously. She approached slowly, her footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. Working on something important? Madison asked. Derek spun around, startled. When he saw Madison, his expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. What do you want? I wanted to talk to you about your newspaper, Madison said, taking a seat at the computer next to his. I've been reading it online. Interesting articles. Derek's eyes narrowed suspiciously. So I noticed you write a lot about student activities, school events, that sort of thing. Must be nice having access to all that information. Where are you going with this? Derek asked. Madison turned to face him fully. I've been thinking about journalism. About how important it is to verify sources, check facts, make sure you're not publishing anything that could be considered libelous. Derek's face went white. Madison could see his mind racing, trying to figure out where this was heading. For instance, Madison continued, Last month you published an article about the budget shortfall in the athletics department. Very detailed. Financial information. I wonder where you got those numbers. That's public information, Derek said quickly. Is it? Madison asked. Because when I called the school district office, they said those specific budget figures weren't scheduled to be released until next month. They were very curious about how a high school newspaper might have gotten access to confidential financial documents. Derek's hands clenched into fists. You can't prove anything, can't I? Madison pulled out her own phone and showed Derek a screenshot. This is an email thread between you and someone with the username BudgetGuy87. Very illuminating. Conversation about how much certain athletic boosters are really contributing to the program. Derek lunged for Madison's phone, but she pulled it back smoothly. I wouldn't, she said calmly. This is just a screenshot. The original emails are backed up in several secure locations. What do you want? Derek asked, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. The same thing I told Ashley, Madison replied. I want to be left alone. No more games, no more threats, no more humiliation sessions in the cafeteria. And if we don't agree to your terms? Madison smiled, and for the first time in her life, it wasn't a shy, apologetic expression. It was cold and predatory. Then I start making phone calls. First to the school district about how their confidential information is being leaked to high school students. Then to the State Journalism Ethics Board about high school newspapers publishing unverified information. And finally to the county prosecutor about potential corruption in local government contracts. Derek stared at her, his mind clearly racing through the implications. His family's newspaper was already struggling financially, and a scandal involving unethical reporting practices could destroy what little credibility they had left. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Try me, Madison replied simply. As Madison walked home that afternoon, she felt lighter than she had in days. She had faced down 2 of her 3 tormentors and emerged victorious. But she knew the most dangerous confrontation was still ahead of her. Bryce Cunningham was different from Ashley and Derek, where they relied on social manipulation and information warfare. Bryce's power came from his physical presence and his status as the school's golden boy. He was also the most unpredictable of the 3, prone to explosive outbursts when things didn't go his way. That evening, Madison received a text from an unknown number. Parking lot. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Come alone. Madison stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. She knew it was from Bryce, and she knew what he was planning. A private confrontation away from teachers and witnesses, where he could use his size and strength to intimidate her back into submission. But Madison had been preparing for this moment. She had studied Bryce's patterns, his weaknesses, his fears. She knew exactly how to handle him. The next morning, Madison arrived at the school parking lot at exactly 7 a.m. Bryce was waiting by his truck, a massive Ford F-150 that his father had given him for his 17th birthday. He was dressed in his Letterman jacket and jeans, every inch the stereotypical high school quarterback. Nice of you to show up, Bryce said as Madison approached. I was beginning to think you'd chickened out. What do you want, Bryce? Madison asked, stopping about 10 feet away from him. I want to know what the hell you think you're doing, Bryce said, his voice already rising. Ashley told me about your little conversation yesterday. Derek says you've been making threats. I've been defending myself, Madison replied calmly. There's a difference. Bryce stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. You think you're smart, don't you? Think you can outsmart us with your little games? I think I can outsmart you, Madison said, meeting his eyes steadily. The question is whether you're smart enough to know when you've lost. Bryce's face flushed red with anger. Lost? I haven't lost anything. You're still the same pathetic loser you've always been. Am I? Madison asked. Let me ask you something, Bryce. How are your grades this semester? The question caught Bryce off guard. What? Your grades? Madison repeated. Specifically, your grade in Mr. Peterson's calculus class. Bryce's expression shifted from anger to confusion. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, Madison said. You see, I've been doing some research. College scouts are very particular about academic performance. They want athletes who can maintain their eligibility throughout their college careers. My grades are fine, Bryce said, but Madison could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Are they? Madison asked. Because according to the grade posting system that Mr. Peterson updates every Friday, you're currently sitting at a D- in calculus. One more failed test and you'll be looking at an F for the semester. Bryce's face went pale. How do you know that? Madison smiled that same cold, predatory smile she had given Derek. I know a lot of things, Bryce. I know that your scholarship to State University requires you to maintain a B average. I know that. Your father has been making generous donations to certain teachers to ensure your grades stay where they need to be. And I know that the NCAA takes academic fraud very seriously. You can't prove any of that, Bryce said, but his voice was shaking now. Can't I? Madison asked. Tell me, Bryce, what would happen if someone were to anonymously tip off the NCAA about potential grade manipulation? How thoroughly do you think they'd investigate your academic record? Bryce stared at her, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. Madison could see the exact moment when he realized that his entire future was hanging in the balance. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to walk away, Madison said, all three of you. Leave me alone, leave my friends alone, and pretend I don't exist. In return, I'll pretend I don't know anything about grade manipulation, budget leaks, or abuse of political power. Bryce nodded slowly, the fight completely gone out of him. Okay, he said. Okay, we'll leave you alone. As Madison walked toward the school building, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had done it. She had faced down her tormentors and emerged victorious. But more than that, she had discovered something about herself that she never knew existed. Madison Fletcher was no longer the invisible girl who hid in the shadows. She was someone who could fight back, someone who could protect herself and the people she cared about. The quiet girl who had meowed like a cat in the cafeteria was gone forever, replaced by someone far more dangerous and infinitely more powerful. The war was over, and Madison had won. But as she would soon discover, victory would bring its own set of challenges and consequences that she never could have anticipated. The weeks following Madison's victory should have been the happiest of her high school career. Bryce, Ashley, and Derek kept their word. They avoided her completely, no longer sitting near her in classes or making snide comments in the hallways. The humiliating videos disappeared from social media as quickly as they had appeared. For the first time in months, Madison could walk through Riverside High without looking over her shoulder. But something unexpected began happening. Other students started approaching her. It began with Marcus Webb, a sophomore who had been dealing with his own bullying situation. He found Madison in the library during lunch, nervously fidgeting with his glasses as he explained how two seniors had been stealing his lunch money and forcing him to do their homework. I heard what you did, Marcus said quietly. How did you get them to back off? Could you help me? Madison looked at the scared boy across from her and saw herself just weeks earlier. What kind of help? She asked. I don't know, Marcus admitted, but whatever you did, it worked. They're actually afraid of you now. Word spread quickly through the school's social underground, the network of outcasts, loners, and targets who had previously suffered in silence. Students who had never spoken to Madison before began seeking her out, sharing their stories of harassment and asking for advice. There was Jennifer Chun, a junior whose ex-boyfriend had been spreading intimate Photos of her after their breakup. Lisa Rodriguez, whose former friends had turned on her after she reported their cheating scheme. David Kumar, who faced daily racist taunts from a group of boys who thought they were being funny. Each story was different, but they all shared common elements: powerlessness, fear, and the feeling that no adult would take their problems seriously. Madison found herself becoming an unlikely counselor, listening to tales of cruelty that made her own experience seem almost mild by comparison. The thing is, Jennifer confided during one of their conversations, "I know I should report him to the police, but his dad is a lawyer. Everyone says I'll just make things worse for myself." Madison nodded thoughtfully. She had learned that most bullying situations involved complex power dynamics that couldn't be solved with simple solutions. "Have you documented everything?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "Screenshots, dates, witnesses, evidence," Madison explained. "The thing about bullies is they always think they're smarter than they are. They leave trails." Over the next month, Madison found herself developing a system. She would meet with students who sought her help, listen to their situations, and then guide them through a methodical process of gathering evidence and identifying their tormentors' weaknesses. She never confronted the bullies directly. That would have made her a target again. Instead, she taught her clients how to protect themselves. The transformation was remarkable. Marcus Webb learned to document the theft and extortion he was experiencing, then presented the evidence to the principal, along with copies of the stolen homework assignments. The two seniors found themselves suspended and facing potential criminal charges. Jennifer Chun discovered that her ex-boyfriend's photo distribution was not only illegal, but also violated the school's technology policy in multiple ways. Armed with this knowledge, she was able to force him to delete all the images and issue a public apology. Madison's reputation began to shift. She was no longer seen as the weird, quiet girl who had meowed in the cafeteria. Now she was whispered about as someone who could solve problems, someone who knew how to fight back against the popular kids, who had ruled the school unchallenged for years. But with her new reputation came new dangers. It started with small things. Her locker was vandalized with the word "snitch" spray painted across it. Anonymous notes appeared in her backpack, warning her to mind her own business. Someone created a fake social media account using her name and posted embarrassing content designed to damage her reputation. Madison knew these attacks weren't coming from Bryce, Ashley, or Derek. They were too scared of her to risk direct retaliation. Instead, she was facing backlash from the broader social ecosystem of the school. Popular students who saw her activities as a threat to the established order. The situation escalated when Madison tried to help Samantha Rivera's younger sister, Elena, who was being cyberbullied by a group of senior girls. The bullies had created a fake dating profile using Elena's photos and were using it to humiliate her online. Madison was in the middle of explaining to Elena how to report the fake profiles when Cassandra Phillips, one of the school's most feared mean girls, appeared at their table in the library. Well, Cassandra said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't our little vigilante and her latest project." Cassandra was everything that Ashley Morrison had pretended to be: genuinely popular, effortlessly beautiful, and ruthlessly intelligent. Where Ashley's cruelty had been driven by insecurity, Cassandra seemed to come from a place of pure entitlement. "We're just studying," Madison said carefully. "Are you?" Cassandra asked, sliding into the seat next to Elena. "Because I heard you've been playing detective again, sticking your nose into other people's business." Elena shrank back in her chair, clearly terrified. Madison felt a familiar surge of protective anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Madison said. Cassandra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, please. Everyone knows what you've been doing. Playing little helper to all the losers and outcasts. But here's the thing you need to understand. There's a natural order to things, and you're disrupting it." "What natural order?" Madison asked, genuinely curious about Cassandra's reasoning. Some people are meant to be on top, and some people are meant to be on the bottom, Cassandra explained, as if she were discussing the weather. It's always been that way. The strong survive, the weak get eaten. You're trying to upset the balance. And that makes you a problem. Madison felt something cold settle in her stomach. Unlike her previous tormentors, Cassandra wasn't motivated by personal insecurity or the need to feel powerful. She was motivated by something much more dangerous. Ideology. What do you want? Madison asked. I want you to stop, Cassandra said simply. Stop helping people, stop playing hero, stop pretending you're something you're not. Go back to being invisible, and everyone will be happier. And if I don't? Cassandra's smile widened, showing perfect white teeth. Then you'll discover that. Your little victory over Ashley and her friends was just the beginning. You beat the JV team, Madison. Now you're playing in the major leagues. That night, Madison lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had thought that defeating Bryce, Ashley, and Derek would be the end of her problems. Instead, she had apparently painted a target on her back for an entirely new category of predator. But something had changed in Madison during her transformation from victim to protector. The thought of backing down, of abandoning the students who had come to her for help, felt like a betrayal of everything she had learned about herself. She thought about Elena Rivera's terrified face, about Marcus Webb's grateful smile when his bullies were finally held accountable, about all the other students who were suffering in silence because they didn't know how to fight back. Madison Fletcher had discovered something about herself that she never knew existed. Not just the ability to protect herself, but the desire to protect others. She had found her purpose, and she wasn't going to let Cassandra Phillips or anyone else take it away from her. The quiet girl, who had once meowed like a cat, was gone forever. In her place was someone who had learned that true strength came not from physical power or social status, but from the courage to stand up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. The war with Bryce, Ashley, and Derek had been just a warm-up. The real battle was about to begin, and Madison Fletcher was ready to fight. Cassandra Phillips didn't waste time making good on her threats. Within days of their confrontation in the library, Madison's life became a carefully orchestrated nightmare that made her previous experiences look like playground squabbles. It began with Madison's college applications mysteriously disappearing from the guidance counselor's office. Then her part-time job at the local bookstore suddenly ended when the owner received an anonymous tip about Madison's unstable behavior at school. Her mother's car tires were slashed in the diner parking lot, and rumors began circulating that Madison's family was involved in some kind of insurance fraud. But Cassandra's masterpiece was more subtle and infinitely more destructive. She began systematically turning Madison's new allies against her by revealing embarrassing secrets about each of them. Secrets that could only have been discovered through careful investigation and strategic questioning. Marcus Webb stopped coming to Madison for help after somehow, inexplicably, his most humiliating childhood stories became common knowledge among his classmates. Jennifer Chun distanced herself after private details about her family's financial struggles were anonymously posted on social media. One by one, the students Madison had helped began avoiding her, too afraid of becoming Cassandra's next targets. Madison found herself more isolated than ever, but now with the added burden of knowing that her attempts to help others had only made their lives worse. She sat in the library during lunch, surrounded by empty chairs that had once been filled with students seeking her advice. Regretting your choices? Cassandra appeared beside Madison's table, her presence as sudden and unwelcome as a thunderstorm. I told you to stop playing hero. Madison looked up at her tormentor, noting the satisfaction in Cassandra's perfectly made-up face. What did you do to them? Nothing they didn't do to themselves, Cassandra replied, settling into the chair across from Madison with the confidence of a queen claiming her throne. People have secrets, Madison. Embarrassing, damaging secrets that they'd rather keep hidden. I simply help those secrets find their way into the light. How? Madison asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Cassandra's smile was cold and predatory. The same way you gathered information about Ashley and her friends, except I'm much better at it than you are. I have resources you can't even imagine. Madison felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the scope of what she was facing. Cassandra wasn't just another high school bully, she was something far more dangerous. She had the intelligence to plan complex psychological campaigns, the patience to execute them over weeks or months, and the resources to dig up information that should have been impossible for a teenager to access. What do you want from me? Madison asked. I want you to understand your place, Cassandra said, leaning forward with predatory intensity. You're not special, Madison. You're not some kind of avenging angel sent to protect the weak. You're just another victim who got lucky once and started believing her own hype. Maybe, Madison admitted, but at least I helped people. Did you? Cassandra asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made their lives worse. Marcus is more miserable now than he ever was before you helped him. Jennifer's family is facing social ostracism. That could destroy her father's business. Elena Rivera transferred schools because she couldn't handle the harassment that escalated after you got involved. Each word hit Madison like a physical blow. She had known that her intervention had caused problems for some of the people she'd tried to help, but hearing it laid out so starkly made her question everything she thought she had accomplished. You're responsible for all of that, Madison said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Cassandra asked. Or are you? You're the one who convinced them to fight back. You're the one who taught them to make enemies of people who were perfectly willing to leave them alone as long as they stayed in their lane. Madison felt doubt creeping into her mind like poison. Had she really helped anyone, or had she simply created more victims? Had her transformation from silent sufferer to active protector actually made things worse for everyone involved? I can see you thinking, Cassandra observed with satisfaction. Good. That means you're finally starting to understand reality. Some people are meant to be victims, Madison. It's not cruel, it's just nature. When you interfere with that natural order, people get hurt. For a moment, Madison almost believed her. The guilt and self-doubt were overwhelming, and the temptation to accept Cassandra's worldview was strong. It would be so much easier to go back to being invisible, to stop caring about other people's suffering, to accept that some people were just meant to be crushed by those with more power. But then Madison thought about something her mother had told her years ago, back when her father had first left and Madison had blamed herself for not being good enough to make him stay. Some people will try to convince you that you deserve the bad things that happen to you, Janet Fletcher had said, holding her crying daughter close. They'll tell you that fighting back just makes things worse, that you should accept whatever cruel BS life throws your way. But that's not wisdom, honey. That's just what people say when they benefit from keeping others down. Madison straightened in her chair, feeling something crystallize inside her chest. You know what, Cassandra? You're right about one thing. I'm not special. I'm not some kind of superhero or avenging angel. Cassandra's smile widened, sensing victory. But I am something else, Madison continued, her voice growing stronger. I'm someone who refuses to accept that cruelty is natural or inevitable. I'm someone who believes that people deserve better than to suffer in silence just because they're not strong enough to fight back alone. Cassandra's expression shifted from triumph to irritation. You still don't get it. No, you don't get it, Madison interrupted, standing up from her chair. You think power comes from making people afraid, from keeping others down so you can stay on top. But that's not real power. That's just fear wearing a crown. Madison pulled out her phone. and placed it on the table between them. The recording app was running, and the red dot indicated that it had been capturing their entire conversation. "You want to know what real power looks like?" Madison asked. "It looks like this." Cassandra's face went pale as she realized what Madison had done. "You were recording this? That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," Madison said calmly. "Iowa is a one-party consent state, which means I can record any conversation I'm part of without informing the other person." "I looked it up," Madison touched the screen, stopping the recording. "Interesting conversation we just had. You admitted to deliberately destroying people's reputations, revealing private information, and orchestrating a campaign of harassment. I wonder how that would sound to Principal Henderson. Or to your father, who I believe is running for city council next year." For the first time since Madison had known her, Cassandra Phillips looked genuinely afraid. "You can't prove any of that. It's just talk, is it?" Madison asked. "Because I've been documenting everything that's happened since our last conversation. Every mysterious leak, every convenient rumor, every perfectly timed piece of gossip. I've been tracking social media posts, timestamp correlations, and digital footprints. You're very good at psychological warfare, Cassandra, but you're not as good at covering your tracks as you think you are." Madison picked up her backpack and slung it over her shoulder. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop targeting me and anyone who's ever asked for my help. You're going to find better ways to spend your time than making other people's lives miserable. And if you don't, this recording and all my documentation goes to every authority figure who might be interested in it." "You think this is over?" Cassandra asked, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you've won?" Madison paused at the library, exit, and looked back at her defeated tormentor. "I think I've learned something important. The fight isn't about winning or losing. It's about refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged, even when it's easier to look the other way." 3 weeks later, Madison Fletcher sat in the same cafeteria where her nightmare had begun. But everything was different now. Marcus Webb had returned to school and was sitting with a group of friends who genuinely seemed to enjoy his company. Jennifer Chun was laughing with her lab partner in chemistry class. Elena Rivera had come back from her brief stint at another school, emboldened by her sister Samantha's support and Madison's example. Cassandra Phillips had transferred to a private school across town, claiming that Riverside High wasn't academically challenging enough for someone of her caliber. Everyone knew the real reason, but nobody talked about it openly. Madison was no longer invisible, but she was no longer a target either. Students still came to her for advice, but now they did so openly, without fear of retaliation. She had started an unofficial support group that met in the library during lunch, a safe space for anyone dealing with harassment or bullying. "You know what's funny?" Samantha Rivera said, joining Madison at her table. "A few months ago, everyone thought you were the weakest person in school. Now you might be the strongest." Madison smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that first terrible day when she had been forced to meow like a cat in front of the entire cafeteria. "I'm not stronger than anyone else," she said. "I just learned that strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest or the most popular." "What is it about then?" Samantha asked. Madison looked around the cafeteria, watching her classmates eat and laugh and live their lives without fear. "It's about deciding that you won't let other people's cruelty define your world. It's about standing up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't stand up alone." The quiet girl who had once meowed like a cat was gone forever, but in her place was someone infinitely more powerful, someone who had learned that the sharpest claws weren't made of fear or anger, but of courage and compassion. And in Cedar Falls, Iowa, that was more than enough to change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't Forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.